Has anyone here heard of the app called Zalora? Yeah? Okay, I see heads nodding, hands up, and a very loud yes from the back over there. So our next speaker is actually none other than Mei Chin, who is the head of product growth, experimentation, and analytics at Zalora. And she's here to join us today. She is the strategist who leads a team to build brands and has delivered many successful product developments over the years. Now, what she will be sharing with us this afternoon is about starting a career in Product 101, even if you do not have any technical background at all. So, without further ado, please join me in putting our hands together to welcome up on stage Miss Mei Chin.
Hello, everyone. Really great to see all of you here today, and very excited to share with all of you some extremely practical and actionable steps you can partake even as early as tomorrow to kickstart your journey into product. So hopefully this gets all of you feeling motivated and excited to start your product story. So to get right into it, first of all, quick introduction about myself. My name is May. I'm originally from Kuala Lumpur. I was transferred here by my company just a few months ago. And specifically, I am currently the head of product growth and analytics in Zalora. I've been holding this role for a little under 2 years and a half now. And previously, before my time in Zalora, I've worked across a myriad of different startups you may or may not have heard of, such as Lazada, Mindvalley, and iPrice, to name a few, spanning across many different industries, such as edutech, health tech, and of course, fashion tech, which is where I am right now. And to close off the introductions, first of all, a little bit about Zalora, in case you guys haven't heard of it. Zalora, in a nutshell, is Southeast Asia's largest online fashion platform with over 12 million unique users shopping with us at any given time. We house thousands of brands across many different categories for you to choose from, and we are also a proud member of the publicly owned German-based global fashion group, which boasts average revenues of 1 billion euros and 42 million orders in a year, to give you an idea of the scale that we operate at. So introductions aside, here's what we're going to be diving into today. First of all, we're going to be starting with a very quick definition of what even is a product manager. You know, it's definitely a term that gets thrown around quite a lot, but I think very few have a practical understanding of what it actually means on a day-to-day basis, so we're going to be covering that. We will then be going into the different types of product managers. There are actually a few different flavors and styles of product management. Depending on your background, skills, and even your personality, it might be a different type that resonates with each of you. And finally, we're going to go into what you should then do if you want to kickstart this journey in product. Extremely practical and actionable next steps that you can partake in even today or tomorrow to begin your product story. And then, of course, closing off with morals of the story, some key learnings and takeaways that I hope I'm able to convey well enough today. So first of all, what even is a product manager? And what I'm going to be sharing with you is an extremely well-known quote on what exactly a product manager is and does. Now, just by reading this definition, you might think, okay, this sounds a little bit boring. It doesn't give me a lot of color or a lot of context as to what product management actually is. And to provide you with that, I'm going to be sharing a true story about where the role of product manager even originated from. So a very little known fact is that the first product manager ever in the history of tech was actually created by Procter & Gamble, a very famous consumer goods company, and they actually invented the product manager role to help grow sales of their soap product. So why exactly was this role needed for soap? Well, to make that connection with the quote I've just shared with you, first of all, product management is all about identifying your deeper customer need. So within the context of soap specifically, this would entail this person sitting down and asking themselves, why exactly would customers want my soap in particular when there are so many other different types of soap and other brands on the market? Why us, and what is our unique selling proposition? The next facet to that is the business objective you want your product or feature to specifically address to grow your overall company health. So this would entail then this person sitting down and asking themselves, what is the strategic importance of selling soap for my company? How does it fit within my company's overall portfolio? And why is it a strategic advantage for us to even sell soap in the first place as opposed to another product? The third part to that would then be what success looks like for a product. So asking yourself the question, how do I measure the success of my soap? Would it be, for example, in terms of how often customers are buying your soap product within a year? Would it be in the form of the types of ratings and reviews that your soap product is getting? How exactly do you know your product is successful and resonating with your users? And finally, it's also all about rallying your team to turn the vision you have for your soap product into tangible reality. So asking yourself, what does my team need to do on a practical level to maximize the success of my soap product? So hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer to paint more of an interesting story for you on a very general basis as to what product management is about and what it looks like and also its origins. And now, if we are to replace the soap product with a modern day product, such as an app or a website, for example, you would then get an idea of how that initial soap product management back in the day translates into a modern day context and what exactly it is that modern day product managers do. These would be people who sit down and ask themselves, why would people want my app? What is the strategic importance for the company that my app holds? How do I measure the success of my app? And finally, how do I rally my team? What does my team need to do to maximize the success and strategic opportunity for my app? And in a nutshell, this is what modern day product managers do. So as I mentioned before, when it comes to modern day product managers, there are several different types, different flavors, each of which may or may not be interesting to you depending on your skills, competencies, or even your personality. So today I'm going to be covering 4 of these main types, although do keep in mind there are much more, but these are probably the 4 most commonly known ones. So first of all, we of course have what we call our technical product manager. These are typically people who have some kind of technical background, perhaps a computer science degree or software engineering degree. And as they forage into their product career, they would typically work on more technical products such as database management, API software, for example. These are extremely technical people who usually are able to converse with your engineers on an extremely deep level as to what exactly the technical design and infrastructure of their products should look like. We then, of course, have the growth product manager, which is actually the category that I fit into. So as I mentioned before, I don't have any kind of technical background, and it's not a necessity at all for the growth product manager to have any form of technical expertise, at least not in the beginning. So instead, what the growth product manager does is to typically own a specific set of business outcomes. New user growth, for example, user retention rate, even your yearly sales of your product, for example. These are typically outcomes that a growth product manager takes specific ownership of and does whatever they can within the product to meet each of those performance indicators. And these are typically people who have some kind of business background, very strong business acumen, maybe a commerce or economics degree, ideally maybe even an MBA for a business school. And kind of a fun fact I would like to share here as well, depending on what style of product manager you are, it also heavily influences the types of companies who will want to hire you. Me being a growth product manager, for example, means that there are many companies on the market who would never even think of hiring me, which is completely fine. So it's all about finding that right fit for yourself. A company like Facebook, for example, being founded by Mark Zuckerberg, who has a really strong computer science background, typically only prefers to hire product managers with deep technical expertise. The exact converse situation of that would be a company like Amazon, who has preferential hiring for people with some kind of business school degree or MBA and not necessarily needing to have a technical background. Going into the third style of product management is the UI/UX product manager. These are typically people with some kind of background or experience in graphic design, user experience or user research, and as they partake in their product career, would typically be working on vastly improving the subjective user experiences within an app or a website, for example. These kinds of people would also typically carry out a lot of on-the-ground user research, focus groups, qualitative interviews, really putting the user at the forefront to make sure that your product is delivering the best experience possible, and therefore, as an extension of that, helping your product to be as successful as possible. And finally, we have the data product manager. So these are people who are extremely strong with the quantitative side of things. They typically have some kind of mathematics degree, experience with data querying, for example, data visualization, essentially helping to turn all of the data points you are collecting into a cohesive narrative and a cohesive story that you can then use to optimize your product. So in a nutshell, these are, I think, the 4 most common types of product managers on the market today. So it'll be really interesting to see, as you guys are hearing me explain this, what you think your personality best resonates with. So maybe you have to think about that. So what should you do now that you have a better idea of the origins of the product manager role and also the 4 main types of product managers? I'm going to be breaking it down with a simple 4-step process. So first of all, you would need to sit down and deconstruct the current skills and competencies and even interests that you as an individual hold right now. You would then need to take all of these skills that you have listed down and concretely map it to each of the 4 different product manager types that I mentioned earlier to see which one is the most compatible with who you are as a person and what you bring to the table. From there, you will need to construct a very memorable resume. At the end of the day, product roles are extremely competitive. Everybody wants to work in product these days, so you would need an outstanding resume to truly stick out and make yourself remembered. And finally, you would then, of course, once you've gotten your foot in the door, to ace the product manager interview. And I'll be taking you through each of these 4 steps to give you some very actionable tips and techniques that you can use completely succeed in this 4-step process. So first of all, deconstructing your skills and competencies. This is it's actually a very easy task to do, but it does require a certain level of self-awareness and self-introspection. Be honest with yourself. Take an hour, maybe half an hour, sit down and ask yourself, what am I actually good at, right? And nobody is good at everything, so truly recognize where your strengths and weaknesses lie. You might then end up with a list of skills and competencies that looks a little something like this. And I think the most important thing to keep in mind here is to be self-aware. Be truly honest as to what you bring to the table and what you do not. From there, put this list of skills side by side with the 4 different types of product managers that I mentioned earlier, and then perform a mapping. Out of each of these skills, which one connects the best with each of these 4 different product manager types? So I've actually done a quick example of this for myself here, and as you can see, I firmly fall within the growth product manager type, simply based on the compatibility of my historical skills and competencies. And I think this is an extremely easy and quick way to first assess for yourself what style of product management resonates the most with you. And I strongly believe you shouldn't even be applying for product roles without first establishing this understanding for yourself. It's always good to be more laser focused in your job application process. So before I move on to the 3rd step, I would like to address the elephant in the room and an extremely commonly asked question when it comes to any kind of product management role, which is, do I need technical skills to succeed in this role or to even be considered for this role? The short answer to that is no. Why a lot of companies include technical expertise needed within their job descriptions is because they are using technical experience as a proxy for some other important but non-obvious qualities. The first of which is your ability to form mutual respect with software engineers. It's about being able to understand the unique technical perspective that they bring to the table and being able to reconcile that in your overall product strategy. So you don't strictly need a technical background to be able to do this. I would argue you just need to be a good listener and having a strong ability to balance different perspectives across the business and the technical side. The other quality that product interviewers typically look for when they say technical expertise needed is having a good intuition of how engineering works. And although this might sound a little bit counterintuitive, you don't necessarily need to have a strong technical background in order to do this successfully. What you would instead need to do is to be a strong logical thinker to understand the cause and effect in every product decision that you make, and to also be able to reconcile the bigger picture with the more granular, smaller details, being able to see not just the forest, but also the trees, so to speak. So being able to do that would help to demonstrate to your interviewer that, yes, I do not have a technical background. However, I do have a good intuition of how things work and how my product works under the hood. And finally, the last quality is for you to be scrappy and self-sufficient. And oftentimes, this is way more important than having a solid technical background. Being able to show that even if you need to rely on your engineers for the answer to a certain technical question or whatnot, and even if your engineers may be a little bit slow to respond, you are still able to have that resourcefulness to uncover that answer from elsewhere, whether it's through your own research or consulting other colleagues, maybe even consulting a mentor that you have for yourself. And in a nutshell, these three qualities is actually what companies mean when they say we need technical expertise. So again, to recap, you do not need a technical background. Instead, focus on demonstrating your competence through a combination of these three qualities. Next, how do we construct a memorable resume? So what I'm going to be sharing with you guys is an extremely concrete example that you can start using as early as tomorrow. And what I find is really common with a lot of new candidates who want to explore a product role is they often have the concern, what do I write in my resume? For example, I've just graduated from university. I feel like I've done nothing, right? I haven't started my career yet. What do I put in there exactly? Or maybe even something like, it feels so silly including my final year university projects in my resume. Do people even care about that? It all just feels so artificial to put these things in there. So what I would say to that is, it's really not true. It's not necessarily about the concrete achievements you've accomplished so far. It's rather about your story and how you spin that narrative for yourself. And I'm going to be showing you a specific example of how to accomplish that with an extremely strong cover letter format. So this is the same cover letter format that I've been using for myself throughout the entirety of my career. And me being me, working in growth and experimentation, I measure everything that I do. And what I found so far is that this cover letter literally gets a 90% response rate. So feel free to emulate this and use this for yourself. I've tried and tested this and iterated on this over the years, and it is extremely effective. So what does this format look like? And why is it so effective in conveying a strong narrative for yourself? So you would start with some kind of opener like this, for example. Feel free to take a photo of this if you just want to emulate this. But essentially what you are doing here is to keep it very light on the words. No one cares about your introductions. That's just a waste of time. So keep it as short as possible. Just say, found this role, love it, want to apply. Here is why I should be considered. And then what I do is to immediately cut to the part where I convey my direct value add to the role. And the way that I like to illustrate this is through a table here with two columns where you have a column for the advertised job scope in the initial job posting, and then a second column for your qualifications and how it then maps to that job scope. How does that look like in practice? You would put in what was literally copy and paste the bullet points that were listed in the job description, and then in the next column, tell them, based on this bullet point you are advertising, here is why I, as an individual, can uniquely meet the need of this role. So an example of that when it's filled in, let's say, in the job description, they would say something like, this person needs to have the ability to lead multiple projects on a tight deadline, which is very generic, but a lot of companies actually do put this in their description. How would you then address that in an effective way that doesn't seem artificial, but deeply conveys your personal value add that you are able to leverage to meet this need? I would write something like this, for example. Even if you have no concrete career experience, even if you have no internships, what you can instead do is to spin a story based on what you have done so far. For example, in my final year of university, I was juggling not just completion of my thesis, but also being captain of my university's debate club, and also a passion project of learning Mandarin, for example. But I was able to bring all of these goals to fruition through pure perseverance, ability to prioritize, and so on. And this is the important part, I believe these qualities translate well into product management as it demonstrates so and so and so. So this is how you would best frame your story, even if you feel you haven't done anything concrete so far. If you are to deconstruct your story like this, what you would see is that even without career experience, you still have something to bring to the table, and it's your responsibility to demonstrate that clearly to the hiring manager. And this cover letter is extremely effective in doing that. So we move on to the last step in the process, which is, of course, to ace the interview, arguably the hardest step by far in the overall process. So when it comes to any kind of product manager interview, what you would find is that the structure is pretty standardized, and it usually consists of two key tenets. The first of which are what we call behavioral questions, and the second of which are what we call product questions. In all of the interviews that I've seen, literally, I think hundreds of interviews throughout my career, most of them tend to gravitate around this same format. So it's extremely important that you master this format. So let's first start with behavioral questions. First of all, why? Why do hiring managers even ask you behavioral questions? It's kind of like a judge of your personality or your character, right? So why is that even important in a product manager interview? Well, first of all, there is a real need to have such questions because it's a matter of assessing, have you really done what you've said you've done? And doing a quick sanity check of that, making sure that all of the experiences and skills that you have described in your cover letter have actually really come to fruition in reality. This is the hiring manager's way of assessing for that. It's also about them seeing how you have made a tangible impact on your company, not just, or whatever projects you've partaken in the process. It's not just about a checklist of things that you've done, like, oh, I completed this project, I did this project, I worked in a group for this class. No one cares about the things that you've done. It's about the impact that you were able to bring to the table. For example, due to my role in this group project, I was able to increase our, for example, completion time by 20%. So that, when you phrase it in this way, gives a really clear indicator of the impact you have been able to accrue so far. Some key tenets to keep in mind when it comes to addressing the behavioral question is to always put the nugget first. Product manager, hiring managers for product roles, myself included, we interview hundreds of people in a given quarter, and it can be a little bit exhausting. So what you want to do is to cut through that noise and to immediately grab their attention. If they were to ask you something, let's say, can you tell me about a time when you faced a conflict at university, for example, immediately jump and open with the nugget first. As you are addressing that question, say, oh yes, let me tell you about the time I had an argument with my lecturer. Now that sounds interesting. It hooks them in and it makes them want to listen to the rest of your story. It's all about keeping their attention span alive. Another very effective format that you can use as you are addressing any kind of behavioral question as well is what we call SAR, which is start with the situation, talk about the action, and then close off with the result. For example, if you are to describe, let's say, a bad experience that you have been through in a group project, immediately open with the situation as I did earlier. Let me tell you about the time I argued with my lecturer, for example, and then go into the action. As you are first faced with that conflict, what did you do as an individual to directly address that situation? For example, as I had that argument with my lecturer, I immediately scheduled a follow-up with him and my other group mates to clear the misunderstandings that were hanging in the air, the immediate action that you chose to execute. And then finally, close with the result. As a result of this follow-up meeting that I scheduled, we were able to resolve all tensions within the group. I'm very happy to say we were able to achieve a passing mark on this project. For example, so when you are to frame your story in this way, first of all, it is memorable. It conveys a clear and compelling narrative. And second of all, it cuts through the noise and helps to maintain your interviewer's attention span, which is extremely important. Also, there is a common joke in the product world where everyone says, it always sounds like product managers speak in bullet points, which I think I kind of sound like I'm doing that right now. And this is true, and there's a reason for that. Speaking in bullet points helps you to sound more polished, more considered, and more thoughtful in your approach. So what I would recommend for you is, as you are addressing any kind of behavioral question in your interview, is to not ramble. There can be a temptation to do that and to keep the story going on and on, but refrain from doing so, and instead keep it to the bullets of situation, full stop, action, full stop, result, full stop. And this is how you can grab your interviewer's attention and not make it seem like you are just speaking for the sake of speaking to fill up time. Nobody wants to hear that. And what I would close off with as well is, when it comes to behavioral questions, already go in prepared with 5 stories you have constructed and perfected for yourself within your mental portfolio. You would usually aim to have a ready-made story for one of the biggest successes you've accomplished so far, another story for one of your biggest failures, perhaps another story for when you were dealing with a conflict in a group project or any kind of team exercise, another story for when you tried to achieve a goal, failed to do so, and what was the learning you were able to draw from that. And also I would recommend to have a final story of what you would say is the biggest moral of the story for yourself throughout your career or your journey that you've been able to learn so far. So that's the behavioral question. Now let's move on to the product question. And when I say product question, it's usually the part of the interview that is specifically focused on assessing your level of product thinking. For example, they would ask you something like, okay, let's take a well-known product on the market, such as Spotify. Now imagine that you are Spotify's product manager, and sit down and have that imaginary thought exercise. What would you do to improve Spotify? And they ask you these questions to assess your level of product thinking and how you are able to tangibly think of new features that could make the product more successful. So when you are asked a question like this in your interview, you might think, okay, it makes sense to have an answer like this. Okay, I think they should have better keyboard navigation, right? Maybe make it easier to cancel downloads. Let's improve the Spotify search as well, and make it easier to share music with my friends because I love sharing music with the people around me. This is actually a terrible answer, and you should not be saying something like this, and here is why. When it comes to a product question, it is all about structure. And no hiring manager wants to hear a random list of feature ideas. Every single idea that you suggest needs to be carefully considered. It's meant to achieve a specific product goal or to address a specific problem. So instead of just going in and saying, okay, I think we should have this feature and that feature and so on, refrain from doing that and instead approach your response with structure. For example, you could say, all right, now that I'm role-playing as a Spotify product manager, I'm going to assume in this hypothetical example that my specific goal here is to increase the usage rates among students in Singapore. And do you see how much more targeted your answer will be when you say that? It's all about identifying a specific problem and then mapping solutions to that problem instead of just listing out random features. What is recommended to do here as well is to set the context with clarifying questions. In product manager interviews, it is perfectly acceptable and even recommended to answer questions with a question because it makes you seem like you are more thoughtful and that you have more carefully considered your response. For example, if the interviewer were to first ask you, as a hypothetical product manager, how would you improve Spotify? Instead of answering them straight away, instead go back to them with more questions to set the context. For example, okay, would this be for all of Spotify's users or for users in just a specific geography? Would it be for just users in a specific age range? Would it be for the Spotify app or for the Spotify website? Would it be for even the Apple Watch app, for example? Show that you are targeted and you are carefully considering all aspects of the question. And finally, always keep the user at the forefront. As you are explaining your response and mapping the problem scenarios you have identified with relevant solutions, make sure to always rationalize whatever solution you are suggesting with a clear user story. For example, assuming you are looking to improve Spotify for, let's say, working professionals who live in Singapore, you might say, all right, I would assume that most working professionals would have to have some kind of daily commute. And I assume that most of them are driving, for example. So, because of this, to address the specific user need, it might be a good idea to have an audio to text feature with Spotify. So we don't need to type to interact with the Spotify app, and it would perfectly suit the needs of commuters. For example, always keep the user at the forefront, step into your hypothetical user's shoes, understand their stories, their lifestyle, and see what solutions would then best resonate with the given story that they have. So that was it for me. I'm going to close off with some key learnings that I hope I was able to convey well enough today. First of all, remember to apply structure and self-awareness to all parts of your product journey. Whether you are sitting down to deconstruct your list of skills and competencies, or whether you are mapping your skills to a product manager type, or even as you are putting your resume together and going through the product manager interview, be structured. For example, instead of applying for every single product manager job on the market, laser focus your efforts into the roles that truly resonate with your personality based on the skill mapping exercise that you have performed. As you're going into the interview as well, already have those ready-made stories to go, stored within your mental portfolio. Do not launch into your answers straight away, but instead take some time, set the structure and the context with clarifying questions, and follow the situation, action, result framework to make you seem more polished in your responses. And finally, no, you do not need to have technical skills as a product manager. So hopefully, for those of you in the room who don't have a technical background but are looking to start a role in product, I hope this is a key motivation aspect for you, knowing that you do not need to close yourself off from the product world simply because you do not have a computer science degree, for example. It is possible, but do make sure you are applying to specific roles and companies that do not require technical product managers. So it's all about choosing the right fit for you as well. And finally, it's definitely not easy to get into product. As you can see, it entails a lot of steps, a lot of thinking, a lot of self-introspection as well, which is never easy, but it is well worth the effort. And that's it for me. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you once again to Ms. Mei Chin, the head of product growth, experimentation, and analytics at Zalora. Now, kindly remain on stage because we will be opening questions to the floor. So, does anyone have any questions with regards to, starting a career in product, or maybe things that are more specific, like things that popped into your mind while you were listening to her presentation? Any questions? Okay, I guess maybe I have a question for you. So, as a product manager in the growth sector of Zalora, right? Or maybe even before you joined Zalora, what made you decide to, I guess, join the companies that you did, which is more towards the shopping, right? Like you mentioned, you were a part of other shopping apps as well. So, what made you go more towards being a growth product manager in shopping, in tech shopping, rather than in other parts of the industry?
Sure, thanks for the question. So for me, I definitely firmly see myself within the e-commerce space, as you mentioned. I don't think I'll be leaving it anytime soon. And the reason for that, I think, goes back to what I said earlier, where to be a successful product manager, you need to put your user at the forefront. So for me personally, as an individual, I'm very interested in shopping. I love clothes, buying shoes, things like that. So I am the user. So of course I would understand our target users as well. So I think that's why this was the niche that I found for myself, because I so deeply understand what a good shopping experience look like and also what online shoppers expect from a product.
Okay, thank you for that. I actually have a follow-up question to that, but we are going to open to the floor again. Yes, question over here.
Hi, May. My name is Eve, and I have a questions about like the four. One out of the four product managers role, the technical product managers. Would you give some examples of what does the technical product manager does in a daily basis? That's question one. And the questions two is that you mentioned like, okay, now that I understand that the growth product manager and has been, I guess it's actually quite, can be found in the e-commerce space industry. And is there like, kind of the somewhere that will be listing down like, oh, this kind of industry will be looking for this type of product managers? Example, like e-commerce, mostly looking for growth product manager. Or maybe, Amazon looking for another type of product manager. It might be easier for us to navigate around. Yeah, I'm not sure whether there's something like that exists, or if not, then you can share. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks a lot for the question, Eve, right? So first of all, what does a technical product manager do on a day-to-day basis? Well, very simple terms, as I mentioned, they typically work on more complex technical products. So what this means is that in their usual routine, they would be working extremely closely with the software engineers on their product teams and co-designing suitable technical solutions within their product. It could be designing a new API, for example, some form of new architecture within your tech stack. And then you might also now be wondering then, Eve, can't an engineer just do that? Why do we need a product manager for this, right? And the reason for that is a technical product manager, at the end of the day, is still a hybrid, as are all product management roles. So not only do they have to co-design the technical solutions with their engineering team, they also need to make sure that at the end of the day, the team's perspective is still firmly set on delivering strong business outcomes. Even if you design, for example, the best technical infrastructure in the entire world, doesn't matter if it's not generating tangible profits or business outcomes for your company. So that is where the technical product manager comes in, to not only work on building and designing these technical products, but to also make sure these technical products hit their desired business outcomes. And as for your second question, honestly, I don't know if anything like that exists. I wish it did. I personally had to do a lot of trial and error myself to figure that out, so I don't think so. But I would say as a rule of thumb, depending on the industry that the company falls into, you can make fairly educated assumptions as to what kinds of PMs they might be looking for. But I'm sorry, I'm not able to give a more helpful answer.
Okay, thank you, Eve, and thank you, May. Any other questions from the floor? Yes.
Sorry, I just want to ask, so for example, if you're an interviewer and you're interviewing a candidate, are there certain traits or turn-offs that you will see if someone is applying for a product role that you think that might be a turn-off?
Yes, definitely. So quite a lot, actually. So for me specifically, what I really don't like to see is when an when a candidate, is simply just listing off checklists of things that they've done. For example, oh, I shipped out this feature for this product, or I was able to complete this analyzation for my product. I don't really care about that. Like, even if you ship out 1 million features, doesn't matter if it's not delivering, again, on your business outcomes, right? So I really don't like it when they phrase their achievements in that way. I don't care about what you've done. I care about what you have been able to achieve, ideally in a quantifiable way as well. So that's probably one of the biggest turnoffs for me.
All right. Any more questions? We still have time for a few more. Yes, okay. Give me a moment.
Sorry. So you're saying that I'm Jack. So you're saying that you're more inclined towards the e-commerce product manager side. So if I were to plug you and put you in like financial product, like endowers or like financial app, do you think that the product manager can just like hop around industries, that kind of thing, or is it more or less e-commerce throughout?
So yeah, for me, I definitely prefer to stay in e-commerce, but to be honest, the industry mobility of product managers, which is what you're asking about, right? I don't think it's necessarily confined to a specific industry where you have domain knowledge. It more of depends on whether the business outcomes of each product are the same. Let's say, for example, if I work on a financial product that is subscription-based, I might be able to then move to an edutech product that is also subscription-based, because the level of product thinking that goes into retaining subscribed users or to increase free trials of your subscription, for example, can be pretty similar regardless of what industry your product operates in. What I think would be quite difficult, though, is to move from one product to another that has fundamentally different business outcomes. For example, if you are to move from a B2C to a B2B product, that for me would be pretty difficult and would have much more of a learning curve. So for me, it's not so much about the industry. Don't feel the need to confine yourself in terms of that. It's really more about the business objectives, in my opinion.
All right, very good question. Thank you very much. Anyone else have a question for Miss Mei Chin? No? Okay, so I guess a follow-up question with everything that has been asked so far, right, is when it comes to merging your passion and your profession, would you say that you should be focusing more on, I guess, what pays the bills, to put it simply, rather than pursuing your passion, or do you believe that every individual can find that balance?
No, I think it's really difficult to find that balance, actually. And also, depending on each of your personalities, each of us might have a very different idea of what that balance looks like, right? For me personally, I really like money, so that has always been a huge deciding factor for me.
Yeah.
For someone else, that might not be the case, and that's totally fine. So again, I think it's about sitting down, doing that self-introspection, understanding not just what you bring to the table, but also what makes you happy and what keeps you motivated, right? And then finding the right company and the right role that's able to meet those needs as best as possible.
And follow-up question to that, would you say that there's a certain timeline? Let's say you're trying out in a new company because they, on the other hand, have ticked all of your boxes, so it's like a switch, right? But after a certain period of time, you realize that actually this isn't really something that I want to pursue moving forward. Would you say that there's a timeline, like I'll stay at least or I'll complete at least 1 year so it doesn't look bad on my resume? Or would you choose to leave because, this is not what you're looking for?
That's a really great question. I would say in general, you should leave, if you can, of course, as soon as you stop feeling motivated and excited about the product you're working on, because a demotivated product manager always builds the worst product. So it's a lose-lose situation for everyone. What I'm going to say next is maybe a little bit more controversial, but I personally feel that if you are pretty early in your career, let's say if you have, less than 3 years of work experience, you should not feel inclined to stay on for that long. And actually, if you move to new companies after like a year or a year and a half early in your career, this is the fastest way to multiply your salary, you guys. So by doing this, I was able to quintuple my salary within 3 years.
Wow.
So I highly recommend you do that. You need to be a little bit more selfish. Put your needs first, especially if you're early on in your career. Do what's best for you and don't feel an overt sense of obligation or loyalty to stay on. I think a year and a half is fine. It won't look that bad on your CV. It was okay for me, especially if you're early in your career. If you are later in your career, don't do that.
And how about for interviews, right? You mentioned one part of your segment was to ace that interview segment. And employers usually ask the question after looking at your resume, for example, oh, you haven't stuck to a company for X amount of years, so what makes you think, or how could you make us feel like hiring you and teaching you and coaching you would be worth it for us? Because it seems like you hop.
Yeah, so I've definitely been asked that a couple of times. When I was younger, I used to hop quite a bit, to be honest. I've since stopped that for now. A very generic answer that I typically find to be very effective is saying, I feel that as a product manager, it's so important to expose yourself to a different variety of products, industries, companies, even different team dynamics, right? And I strongly feel I was able to give myself that exposure, which has only made me stronger as a product manager. And And now that I've accumulated and accrued all of this knowledge, I feel like I'm at the point now where I want to find that next best fit for me, where I'll stay a little bit longer and truly invest all the knowledge I've accumulated into this product now. So I usually say something like that.
Okay, thank you so much for all of those insightful questions. Final call. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, we have one last question over here and then we'll move on.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. May I ask, are there any technical skills that employers look out for, or are there any technical skills that stands out to like employers and hirers?
Sure. So again, it depends on the kind of product manager role you are applying for. In general, not really, to be honest, especially if you're looking at more business-oriented product manager roles. What I would say though is that there's no harm in doing a bit of research on your end as well. Understand some fundamental concepts such as the main front-end programming languages out there. Even if you don't know how to code them, just know what they are and what their names are. Things like how APIs are designed and how they work, stuff like that. How databases are structured. Just do some quick reading online. Even if you don't have any tangible experience in those areas, it's fine. Starting with just a working knowledge is totally okay.
All right, thank you once again. Let's give another round of applause for Miss Mei Chin, who has joined us over from Zalora.